There's been a lot of talk about the Chargers potentially taking a running back as early as round one, but what if they waited and got one of the most electric running backs in the draft, Cam Skattebo?
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Droegemeier, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons together, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. To make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Well, Daniel, we're going to jump into a pretty exciting prospect here, running back Cam Skattebo, who was pretty much the entirety of the Arizona Sun Devils offense. Like, he did it all. Very excited to talk about him and what he brings to the table. Definitely some traits that I think a lot of people will like, especially Jim Harbaugh. And of course, now that free agency is kind of, slowed down a little bit, now we got to take a look at what the biggest issues, biggest concerns that the Chargers need to address heading into the draft. And Derwin James, Defensive Player of the Year, anybody? I think after Pat Surtain won it, there is a path to get that done for DJ.
If there's a safety that could win it, Derwin James is that safety. But today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. And David, it's Fan Mail Friday, and I love how many different questions we got from different places on this Fan Mail show, including this one we got from Jordan Dage from Instagram, who said, I'm a diehard Chargers fan. I love the show. Most people are predicting the top 2 running backs will be gone by the time we pick at 22. How would you feel about them waiting and getting Cam Skattebo later and say maybe the 3rd round? He has that Jim Harbaugh fire to him. That would be scary in our expected system. Thanks, and go Bolts. David, I was excited to watch film on Cam Skattebo. Obviously, I watched college football, so I knew kind of about him, but watching it and just kind of really diving into it was a ton of fun, and I would absolutely agree with Jordan Dage here. He has Jim Harbaugh energy to him for sure.
There's no question about it. I mean, the way that he plays the game of football is physical and violent in everything that he does, whether it's running through somebody, whether it's trying to knock somebody's block off, giving a block, whether that's in pass protection or, just as like a lead blocker, he's looking to deliver some pain. And that's exactly what Jim Harbaugh loves. That's the type of football player that he wants to go to battle with. And you see that all over the tape when you're watching Cam Skattebo.
You absolutely do. And I mean, you could put this up as a poll and be like, who said this? Punish the defender because they don't want to do it for 4 quarters. And it could literally be Jim Harbaugh or Cam Skattebo. In this case, it is Cam Skattebo. But as far as just being more physical, being a physical type of team, he absolutely helps you if you want to go in that direction. I mean, I think the biggest thing you think of when you think of Cam Skattebo is the contact balance. I mean, nobody kind of embodies that better than he does. This dude is a true pinball player. You're not going to see, he's just like a total just Tasmanian devil of razor blades. That is his running style. Ranked second in NCAA with 103 missed tackles forced last year. He had 1,200 yards after contact in 2024, which was 3rd in the NCAA. And I thought also just poor 40 time, but did work well in tight spaces. And I think you could see the really good explosiveness grades that he got in the vertical and the broad jump in those tight spaces, being able to get back and forth quickly. But a guy, David, who really, if you're looking as far as production, you're not going to find much better production than one you got from Cam Skattebo, like you said, was the entire Sun Devils offense in their playoff run.
Yeah, I mean, his 2024 season, 1,712 rushing yards, good for 5.8 yards per carry average, 21 touchdowns. This guy was an absolute animal getting into the red zone. When he got into the red zone, he was getting into the end zone. That's what that was. He was cashing in those opportunities and also was an adequate pass catcher as well. 44 receptions on 52 targets, which is a really, really good catch rate for 543 yards. So, I mean, the first things that I put in my notes was runs for touchdowns, catches touchdowns, and throws for touchdowns, because in the game that I watched in the college football playoff against Texas. He had an amazing game where he just went off and he actually threw a 40-plus yard touchdown pass, which was awesome. Also, he runs with a relentless motor. He bounces off defenders like we talked about. The contact balance is fantastic. He brings that physicality. He displays really good vision. I feel like he has some pretty good patience, and he's able to identify which holes to be able to go through, and he's able to hit them. He might not be hitting the home runs every single time, but he is bludgeoning and bludgeoning and bludgeoning until he softens up that spot and he breaks and bursts through. And so I think that's the style of running back that he is, and it showcases itself, and it is very effective.
It is. And it's just super fun, right?
Yeah.
This is a guy that, probably is, a day 2 pick, maybe a 3rd round pick. Maybe he gets the Chargers in the 3rd round. If they went that direction, it'd be hard not to get excited about it just because of the type of player that he is. But that performance versus Texas was special. Over 143 rushing yards, 99 receiving yards, and a 42-yard passing touchdown. And in the second biggest game of the season in the Big 12 championship game, 18 touches for 208 yards and 3 touchdowns. So I think
showing up with the lights on bright, Daniel.
Yeah, and I think his play style actually reminded me a lot of Maurice Jones-Drew, who was much faster than Cam Skattebo is. But just their ability to not make huge cuts and leave people in the dust, but just know how to attack the angles of the defenders and know I might not make this guy completely whiff on me, but he's not going to be able to get enough of me to get me to the ground. And I think that showed up time and time again. And also just the times that you would see him go into a pile and see his little legs churning it out for 3 or 4 or 5, 6 more yards at times, backwards, forwards, wherever he was going to keep pushing that pile forward. But there's a reason he's not a 1st round pick too. And I think if you're looking at kind of the downsides of his game, he's not a home run threat. I mean, the reports coming out of his pro day was that he ran anywhere from a mid 4.5s, which would be really good for him if he was in the 4.5s, especially mid 4.5s, to the low 4.6s. And I think as we've seen with running backs, especially recently, whether it's Bucky Irving, who came out last year running a super slow 40 that made him drop, and I wish the Chargers had him, or Kyron Williams, who had a super slow 40 time that made him drop. 40 times aren't everything, especially when you win the way this guy does. But I do think there is kind of, something to his game where you're like, I know he's an insane college football player, but with that athleticism, kind of what he brings to the table, is that kind of where his game best fits, right? Will it all translate? I think is a fair question for Cam Skattebo. But if it did, obviously it would be a lot of fun. But I understand, too, kind of some of the red flags or the cons to his game, too.
Yeah, I mean, that violent play style, while it is exciting and fun to watch, obviously that could lend itself to him being susceptible to injury. So that's something that, you're going to have to pay attention to for sure. The other big thing is the ball security. The ball security absolutely has to be cleaned up going to the next level. He had 10 fumbles in college football. That's a lot, and that
over
just
3
can't.
seasons.
Over multiple seasons, obviously. But
I don't know if he missed a game due to injury either in those 3 seasons. It'd be interesting to look at. But 10 fumbles is a big number.
The fumbles number's got to get cleaned up. Obviously that's one of the things. If you can't hold on to the football, I don't care how talented you are, you're not going to be on the football field. It's just as simple as that.
100%. And I mean, something that me and you talked about too, like as far as how he fits next to Najee Harris. Yeah, I mean, it's not, thunder and lightning by any means.
Right.
The Chargers could absolutely try to go for someone with a better 40 time, with more of a home run threat, because that's not what this guy necessarily brings to the table. Or they just could go 2 battering rams and just decide that's the way, and wait till later on.
And maybe that's more likely, right?
I mean, maybe we shouldn't underestimate Jim Harbaugh's ability to just want physicality, no matter kind of where he gets it from. I'd say another thing, pass protection. The big hits are nice.
Yeah.
But he loads up every time, and
does.
he's either going to completely whiff or he's going to lay somebody out, and there's no in the middle. Luckily, you have Najee Harris, which is nice because, hey, Najee is known for that. He's a really solid in that aspect, and both of these guys are super sufficient pass-catching options, better than what the Chargers had on the roster last season for sure. And Najee Harris is on a 1-year deal, right? So even though for this year, maybe that seems like kind of redundant skill sets, but if you're looking for that guy for the next 3 or 4 years who can be that battering ram, who can be the guy that puts away games for you in the 4th quarter and just doesn't take no for an answer and never goes backwards, I think they could do a lot worse than Cam Skattebo. I think would just be a ton of fun to watch him, Scatterbolt. You can see the newspaper headlines already, but we still have more to get into. including what the biggest concern is right now. Concern is an interesting word. So we're going to talk about what the biggest concern is now on this roster heading into the draft. And also if there's a position the Chargers could double dip at, including maybe running back, and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. March Madness is here, and FanDuel is giving you the chance to get in on the action like never before. And now we are right in the middle of the Sweet 16, and there's 4 more games tonight, and you guys can get on the action. And if you want a little bit more to be able to spend, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. That's 200 extra bucks to use on everything from buzzer beaters to Cinderella stories and even who's cutting down the nets. With the games tonight, I'm looking at Ole Miss, who's been super hot, plus 3.5, something I'm keeping an eye on. And Michigan, too, just came off, a couple of big wins and the Big Ten championship as well at plus 8.5. Both those teams going up against juggernauts, but everyone at this point is. But it's not just about picking the favorites. You can go with the underdogs as well, like I'm going with today. And also with tournament games happening all night tonight, so much fun action to get in on. So visit FanDuel.com and get in on the college hoops action all tournament long. David, let's get into the rest of our Fan Mail Friday here, and thank you to all the everydayers who contributed, so many that we won't be able to get to all of them today, but we really appreciate everyone who reached out to the show, and there are a couple we're definitely stashing away for future shows as well. But let's get to this one here from Darren Wasser, who I think asked the important question this time of year, which is, what position group are you most concerned about going into the draft? So it's interesting, David, because I think there's less super obvious ones right now than there was even a week ago, as far as the biggest concerns go, because of kind of the supplementary moves that they've made on this roster. But if you're talking about the biggest concern you have right now, assuming they go into the draft with the current roster, what would it be?
I mean, for me, it's elevating the wide receiver room. I still feel like that's a place where, yeah, you added Mike Williams, and I feel like that's a good move, could be a great move depending on the health situation, but still feel like there's somebody that needs to be added to elevate that room even further. Give Justin Herbert a more explosive weapon to pair with Lab McConkey, who is a wide receiver 1 for sure. And I think a lot of people out there, need to kind of remind themselves, like, he just put up 1,200 yards receiving and pretty much broke every Chargers rookie receiving record that they have. So he is a true number 1. But outside of that, you got up and down play from Quentin Johnston. Josh Palmer's out the door. Mike Williams is pretty much the only added, body that you put in the room. So, and I just don't know if that's enough. Actually, I do. It's not enough. You need to add more, and you got to do that in the draft. So I think for me, the wide receiver room is probably the biggest concern, at least up to this point for me.
Yeah, I think when you see that Stephon Diggs contract and some of the contracts getting handed out to wide receivers, it's like, hey, the more you invest in wide receiver, if you hit on one, it's probably going to pay itself off pretty quickly with how much these guys are getting paid. I would agree with that. Like, I think I could be, if they end up getting one of the top pass catching tight ends, maybe that makes me feel a little bit better. I think it is just weapon for me overall, because I think if you wanted to go high-end tight end and lean more into 2 tight end sets and do things like that, you could at least feel a little bit better about the lack of weapons and lack of additions to your wide receiver room. That being said, you cannot go into that draft and come away without a wide receiver. It's just how much of a premium resource are you willing to spend on it? There's also, the other options out there. Could they try to bring back Keenan Allen as a contingency plan? I know we get asked that a lot. I don't see that happening maybe after the draft when it doesn't count against compensatory picks, but hard to argue against that. I mean, I think right now, the single position I think where you're concerned the most is probably left guard, if you're just talking about what position, because you have a great wide receiver. You don't have a great left guard on the roster right now. And I'd say an underrated need for me, the defensive line. I mean, I'm a little concerned they don't have a difference maker in that room right now. It's hard to know what you're going to get from Justin Eboigbe in year 2. You have 3 journeymen with the Deshaun Hand, Taylor Tart, and Naquan Jones. And then you have just a couple of dudes in Tito, Tito Abonia and Scott Matlock, who are just kind of meh. Like,
more of a fullback at this point. Yeah.
Well, I mean, Scott Matlock is, I don't even really count him into my thinking as far as what the defense has going into 2025. That's just kind of where I am with him right now. Yeah. Tito kind of is what it is. I think you need to improve on that. We know Mike Elston can do more with less. We saw it. It's impressive.
Yeah.
What if he had more? What if he wasn't working with less, right?
What if he had more, right? What a concept.
If he's working good with less, imagine what he could do with more.
With more.
Right? Yeah, just more. So the thought of getting getting a guy at that spot. When we talked
getting
about
a
the other
dude, a
day,
difference
like,
maker, right?
you look at the past 4 Super Bowl winners. You're talking about teams with Chris Jones. You're talking about teams with last year Jalen Carter. You're talking about Aaron Donald. So it feels like they had a dude there that it's
A building block
concerning
player,
that
like
they
we
don't.
talked about earlier this week, right?
Right, and it's not like a total concern that they don't have that. They can make it work with less, but it's just I want to see it, right? But
Yeah.
let's get to this one from Deadbolt, who says, what position group are we most likely to double dip? I would say running back. David, would you agree with that? Would you go a different direction? What do you think?
Yeah, I don't think it's running back. I am going to go in a different direction here. Honestly, I think, it's probably one of the position groups we just talked about right now. It's defensive line. I would not be surprised at all to see the Chargers get somebody early in the draft and get somebody in the middle to late rounds, because you look at that room, it's, the only guy that's really on a multi-year contract right now is Justin Aboigbe, and he barely played.
Right.
So you can't really feel good about what his, concepts are for the future unless he, takes a gigantic leap in his second year in the NFL. But yeah, I think defensive line is a realistic one. Also, offensive line, I think, is another one that they absolutely could double dip in that.
If you're counting offensive line all as one, right? Because that's
Sure.
kind of what I have. Like, it's a little cheating to say like interior offensive line because I don't necessarily think they're going to take 2 guards, but like a center and a guard is something where I could see them attacking, right?
Yes, absolutely. And I think that's probably where my focus is as far as double dipping. I could easily see 2, especially defensive line. I could definitely see 2 defensive linemen.
And right now in back-to-back years, they've double and triple dipped at wide receiver. They've taken 5 wide receivers over the last 2 years. Obviously, the only ones you feel decent about right now are Darius Davis, Quentin Johnson, and the budding star that is Ladd McConkey.
Yeah.
I could see running back. I think you're trying, like, tight end, you don't think now because like Tyler Conklin, right? That changes things there. Wide receiver with Mike Williams, you think they're going to take 1, but maybe not 2. There's not a lot of obvious ones. And you're looking at who could they kind of take 2 players at that position where they'd have a chance to make the roster. I think defensive tackle, interior defensive line is one of those. I think running back is too, though. Like in a good running back class, I mean, all you have is Najee Harris, Kimani Vidal, and Hassan Haskins.
Right.
Like, I don't think Hassan Haskins can't be beat out for a roster spot, right? As mostly a special teams player. And Kimani Vidal, I'm not giving up on him now, but I also don't think his roster spot is unimpeachable either.
Yeah.
So I think
of course.
that's kind of a position where I see where you're talking about there with double dipping at running back. If you went with a Cam Skattebo, you'd probably want to go get kind of a home run hitter, a dude that has more of a home run threat later on in the draft class. So I could see that a little bit. But let's get to this one from Omar Aguilar, who asked us this question on YouTube. And we had a lot of questions about J.K. Dobbins. And he says, if we don't get a running back in the draft like Marion Hampton, do you think that Joe Ortiz is bringing back J.K. Dobbins, or are we sticking with Vidal and Haskins? So I'll say I think there's a 0% chance you go into the season with just Najee Harris, Kimani Vidal, and Hassan Haskins in like a UDFA, right? Like, I don't think that that's going to be the plan. There will be another guy in that room, in my opinion. But this is something we haven't really talked about, David, as far as maybe as a backup plan trying to hit up J.K. Dobbins again.
I think that's probably what it is at this point. And I think it's not just for the Chargers, but probably for a lot of teams because, of course, like they have eyeballs. They saw what J.K. Dobbins did last year. Like he was explosive and he was a difference maker when he was on the football field. Like, he absolutely would have went over 1,000 yards rushing if he didn't have that, kind of knee issue that put him on the shelf.
4 games.
For 4 games. He absolutely would have eclipsed 1,000 yards rushing. And, the type of year that he put together after the unbelievable injuries and the seriousness of those injuries for him to overcome that, I mean, I think was a great story for him. But I think not only with J.K. Dobbins, but Keenan Allen as well. I think both of those players are probably on a lot of teams' radars to see how the draft unfolds, because the fact of the matter is you might not be able to get a position that you're looking to get because the draft doesn't always shake out the way you expect it to.
For sure. And I think that Najee Harris's durability makes you feel better about J.K. Dobbins' durability, just because it's like last year they had to rely on Gus Edwards with J.K. out, and then that just didn't work out, But like you have a guy that you at least pairing with them, you don't have 2 guys that have injury issues, right, or an injury history.
Right.
With J.K. Dobbins, I do think he's a good fit with Najee Harris. I think they're both good scheme fits for what the Chargers want to do. He does bring more of a home run threat, but he's also not Jahmyr Gibbs. So, like, I understand what
Right.
people want to see. People want to see the Chargers recreate what the Lions did. If you're trying to recreate that, first of all, Jahmyr Gibbs don't exist really outside of Detroit. They're very, very rare. But you could get a Timu Jahmyr Gibbs potentially, right? If you want to go home run hitter later on in the draft or something like that, I think that's where they would try to address it. I don't think J.K. Dobbins is coming back, but we'll see, because the same reason the Chargers might wait to re-sign Keenan Allen for compensatory pick reasons is the same reason teams could be waiting to sign J.K. Dobbins. But
Yep.
we do have another interesting conversation, including, could Derwin James take his game to even another level? We saw him return to all-pro form last year. Could he get to a defensive player of the year consideration in 2025? We're getting into all that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. All right, David, we still have more of this Fan Mail Friday to get into, and thank you to everyone who hit us up, not only on the YouTube post, not only on Twitter, but also on Instagram as well, and calling into the voicemail line at 323-524-7924, where you can always send your Chargers 30-second question or buy or sell there. But thank you as always for making us your first listen. If you need a second listen, there's no better second listen right now this time of year than the Locked On NFL Draft, where they're getting into and keeping you up to date with all of the latest draft news and getting into all of the biggest prospects with Keith Sanchez and Damian Parsons. So make sure you check them out on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. David, let's start here with something from Matthew in Vegas, who wants to know if maybe we're seeing even a different level, a Super Saiyan level of Derwin James in 2025.
Hey, what's up, guys? I'm Matthew from Vegas, born and raised. Even though I live there, still FTR. So Derwin James, he was awesome last year. It looked like 2018. So this year he's got his back safety. He's got them back. So my question is, do you think this year he could possibly be a candidate for Defensive Player of the Year? I think he should, even though he lost the safety coach. But I think this year he should win it, be a candidate. Let me know what you guys think about that. Hey, guys, bolts up.
It's not hard to kind of wonder if he could get into the conversation just with how well he played last year, where every, Chargers fan who got to watch him week in and week out has kind of a full appreciation for what he brings to the table. And even more when you're really digging into it, just seeing kind of how many hats he's wearing and how good he is at pretty much everything, which is always what's made him special, which is to me why I think if there is a safety that could do it, it would be him. But safety, just historically speaking, is really, really hard. Like, I think that's the biggest thing in his way, is just playing the wrong position.
It is, unfortunately. And, if you go back and you look at all the Defensive Player of the Years, there's really only one, in the last 25, 30 years who won it at the safety position. And he is a Hall of Famer. That is Troy Polamalu. And why did Troy Polamalu win that award? Because he had 7 interceptions. And that's the one thing, for all of the amazing things that Derwin James does, he unfortunately just does not take the football away enough to be put on that level, to be, to be, someone who is trying to vie for that award. Yes, he gets the sack numbers, which are great. 5.5 sacks from a safety is unbelievable. But in reality, to be able to, be, wanting to get that award, it's got to be the 5.5 sacks. It's got to be the 100+ tackles, but it's got to probably be at least 5 or 6 interceptions as well. Like, you have to have the interception numbers. The takeaway numbers have to be eye-popping in order to be able to win that Defensive Player of the Year award.
It's an award that usually lends itself mostly to either dominant edge rushers or dominant defensive tackles, which is why you see the Myles Garretts and the TJ Watts and the Aaron Donalds and the JJ Watts like hoarding them, because that is really kind of like, offensively MVP's mostly a quarterback award. This is mostly a defensive line, interior or edge rusher award. And I mean, you have seen a couple in the last 10 years win it at cornerback, with not just Patrick Surtain last year winning it with 4 interceptions, but also just being a shutdown player. But also, you had Stephon Gilmore 2019, a historic season. And those are corners having to have historic seasons to win it.
Right.
It's been 15 years since Troy Polamalu did it. He did it in 2010. Before that, Bob Sanders did do it a couple of seasons before that. So a couple of safeties in the last 20 years have done it. But you're talking about nobody having done it for at least 15 years. So like I said, I think he is the type of player who could do it. but he would have to put up those sack numbers and also put up 5 or 6 interceptions at least, because Troy Polamalu only had 63 tackles that year in 1 sack. The one big difference that year was he had 7 interceptions, which he had another 7 interception season, and then that year he only got 5th in defensive player of the year. So even getting 7 picks twice wasn't enough for him to win it twice. He had to, it has to kind of line up with maybe no edge rusher getting 18 plus sacks too. So I think timing is part of it, but just because if you have one of those guys who has one of those historic seasons as an edge rusher or a corner that gets 10 picks, it's just going to be so hard to beat it. Even if you put up a 100 tackle, 5 sack, 5 interception season, Shaq Leonard did it, and that won him one at the linebacker position. But that's what it would have to take, and I think he's the only safety that could feasibly put up something like that. But it would have to be literally, an all-time historic season to win it at safety. But let's get to this one from the dude on Twitter who says, with Nick Niemann leaving in free agency, should we get a look at linebacker later in the draft? If our top 3, Dan Henley, Colson, and also Denzel Perryman get hurt, who do we turn to? So I'd say, first of all, there's also Troy Dye, who you have to throw into that conversation as well, who is one of the depth pieces I feel best about on this entire roster. But I do think there's something to, if you're going to draft a linebacker, that is where it's going to come, like we talked about the other day. It's going to come later in the draft for someone that maybe can turn into more, but is mostly a special team-centric person.
Absolutely. Right now, that main special teams guy is Delshon Phillips, right?
And we haven't talked about him a lot either.
Right. He's the guy that got brought in to be, kind of your special teams ace.
Nick Niemann replacement.
Right. He's the
Straight
Nick Niemann replacement on a 1-year deal, right? So he has this 1-year audition to be able to see if he can take that role and kind of keep hold of it for multiple years. But yeah, I wouldn't, be surprised to see, probably very late though, maybe one of those 4, 6 round picks, possibly, use that on a safety on a linebacker that, could fill out that room, could be that next special teamer, could, possibly turn into somebody who gets on the field on defense. That's what Troy Dye did, right? He basically started the majority of his career trying to make an impact on special teams, and he was able to parlay that for an opportunity to show what he could do on defense. He took that opportunity with the Chargers, and guess what? He got rewarded with a multi-year contract because of it.
Yeah, and that's the nice thing about him is he's kind of a super sub for you that also is going to be a core 4 special teams player. And Troy Dye historically has been one of the better special teams players in the league.
Yeah.
So is Delshon Phillips. And maybe it's a shame that we didn't talk about him a little bit more, because this is a move for them trying to upgrade their special teams after what was a down year under Ryan Ficken in 2024, even if it was an okay year overall. They're getting a guy who now has played at least 250 special team snaps in 4 straight seasons. And not only that, but has been one of the highest graded Pro Football Focus special teamers in the league. I mean, out of anyone with 200 special team snaps or more, 218 players had 200 special team snaps in 2023. He ranked 11th highest in Pro Football Focus grade, 5th highest in 2021 in that same measurement. So 2 of the last 4 years, he's been a top 11 special teamer, and that's a guy you're adding kind of randomly later in free agency. So that could be a really underrated addition, because not only has he been towards the top, but he's been super solid at the very least, even in the years that he wasn't, top 11 at his position, or at least as a special teamer. So underrated signing there. Let's get to one more here from Michael Haynes, who hit us up on Instagram at Locked On Chargers to say, hey, I have a question for you guys. What Charger or Chargers do you think will benefit the most from a full offseason with Ben X Factor Herbert? Thanks. David, quickly as we get wrapping up this show, who would you go with here?
Well, a guy that I want to see fully healthy for an entire season that has dealt with injuries in his career is Mike Williams. I want to see Ben Herbert work with Mike Williams, get that body harder to break, so that way when he goes up and does those circus catches, we can feel better about him hitting the ground, popping back up, giving the first down symbol, and keeping it moving.
Because I think that even though he stayed healthy last year and was bad, I think we both believe that if he stays healthy for the whole season, he's going to have a good season. Right?
Yes.
He will have a pretty good season and look much more like himself than he did in 2024. I'll go a different way. I'm going to say Mekhi Becton. And it's just because it's like, let's see what Ben Herbert can do with just this cultivation of mass. Like, what can he do with a 360-pound Mekhi Becton? I would love to see that and can't wait to see that. He also has had some injury stuff in the past too, so that will be an important part of it. I also had Mike Williams in that, but Mekhi Becton, that is one where it's like, I mean, we know he's already a freak athlete to be doing any of the things he's doing at 360 pounds. Now he's going to one of the best strength and conditioning programs in the NFL now. And, you know, the guy who had the top ranked one at the collegiate level, now getting his bearings a little bit more and gets just a specimen of mass to work with in this offseason. So I'm excited to see what he can do.
With the bolt to be able to do it with.
100%. A total temple to really, you know, get weird with it and just try to get the most out of these players. I'd say defensively it's harder because you start looking at it and there's not a ton of new defensive players. We're talking about Delshon Phillips. We also, you know, Deshaun Hand. You have Naquan Jones, but it's not a lot of different dudes that haven't at least got some time with Ben Herbert, so it's a little tougher. I went with Tony Jefferson. I'm excited to see what Tony Jefferson can do in a full offseason with Ben Herbert, because he had a tryout in the summer last year, way after kind of everything got going. And we talked about how much better he could be with a full offseason. Him getting a full offseason with Ben Herbert is something I'm pretty excited about for a safety room that we're feeling really good about. But that is going to wrap things up for today's show. Good news is we're the only Daily Chargers podcast. And even though my daughter's birthday is on Monday, we will have a show on Monday for you because it's Mock Draft Monday. And some things, there's just nothing that can get in the way of them. And what we're talking about this week, we're talking about a lot of weapons in the first round. We're talking about running backs in the first round. We're going big on Monday's show. The defensive tackles in the first round the Chargers could go for, and there are several that I'd love to see Mike Elston get his hands on. So to make sure you don't miss that, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from, as well as finding the show every day on all of our social media, which is where a lot of you guys hit us up for the questions today anyways. You can hit us up at Locked On LAC, where we post the show every day, on Twitter, on Instagram at Locked On Chargers, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page as well. And thank you to everyone who called into the voicemail line. We have a lot of them we want to use, but we have to, they can't be much longer than 30 seconds. If it's a little over, don't worry about it. But if it's over a minute, if it's over 45 seconds, there's just no chance it's getting on the show. So we've had some really good questions that are just too long. If we can tighten them up, we'll get more of them on the show for you guys at 323-524-7924. But super excited about Mock Draft Monday. Super excited for the Chargers to potentially have a chance to get an impact player on the inside, like we talked about today, and give that to Mike Elston and Jesse Minter. But to make sure you guys don't miss it, make sure you're subscribing, especially on Locked On Chargers YouTube channel, where we get into Mock Draft Monday with the defensive tackles on Monday. But until then, take it easy and go Bolts.